영상 틀어주세요.
작년에 우리 노랑부는 독일에서 친구 2명과 첫 번째 기후숲을 만들었다. 기후숲이란 고사하는 숲의 나무들을 솎아내고 기후변화에 대응할 수 있도록 빈 공간에 다양한 나무를 심은 숲이다. 건우가 처음 학교의 아이디어를 발표하던 당시 아직까지 재원도 예산안도 실행 계획도 어떤 구체성이 갖추어지지 않았었다. 하지만 이 일에 공감하고 관심을 가졌던 교수, 연구자, 선임감독원, 공무원 등이 한자리에 모여 대화를 나누는 것에 의했고 이 일이 시작되었다. 1헥타르짜리 대성지 숲은 병원 재단에서 시에 위탁한 땅으로 시내에서 도보로 40분 정도 떨어진 곳에 위치해 있다. 미리 한 달간 홍보한 끝에 3일의 행사 동안 약 250여 명의 시민들이 찾아왔고 11종류의 나무 4,500여 그룹을 심을 수 있었다. 그들 대부분은 서로 알지 못했는데 팀이 되어 같이 흙을 만지고 또 목을 축이면서 새 친구를 사귀었다. 자기 땅도 아니고 아는 사람의 행사도 아니지만 기후위기를 막기 위한 실천으로서 기꺼이 발걸음을 해온 이들이 많았었다. 독일은 기후변화로 인해 높은 기온과 가뭄으로 매년 조금씩 더운 한 해를 보내고 있다. 두어 가지의 종류로 침묵수가 대부분을 이루는 독일 생리는 특히나 이 빠른 변화에 적응하지 못하고 말라 죽고 있다. 문제는 한국 역시 유사한 문제를 안고 있다는 것이다. 그렇다면 기후숲을 한국에서도 만들 수 있을까? 그렇게 우리는 AYARF에 찾아왔다. 우리는 아리수 기후숲 프로젝트라는 이름으로 한강 수계를 바꾸는 야심찬 스케일의 기후숲 프로젝트를 상상하면서 그 대상 도시로 서울과 춘천을 뽑았다. 4일 리서치 기간 동안 우리는 두 도시에서 활동하는 교수, 활동가, 환경단체 소속 시민 8명을 만났다. 두 도시에서 대상지가 될 수 있는 후보들을 뽑아보기도 했다.
외기와 한강 속에 나무 심기 이 세 가지를 연결해서 나무를 심는데
기후숲의 스케일을 점에서 면으로 넓히고 싶었던 야심찬 계획이 뜬구름 잡는 소리로 들린다는 걸 깨닫는 데는 별로 오랜 시간이 걸리지 않았다. 재원도, 예산안도, 실행 계획도 어떤 구체성도 보이지 않아서라고 한다. 한국에서 우린 다시 점에서 시작해야 한다. 숲이 한 그루의 나무에서 시작되는 것처럼 말이다.
Thank you, Anna, for making this nice video. And I'm sorry that I am here again to talk about cleanup art. Aram is well prepared, but today I hope for the last time I talk about this topic by myself. And before we begin, I would like to thank the whole AYARF staff, faculty, fellows, and especially Eugene 선생님 for connecting us to various stakeholders. It was such an amazing opportunity for us to learn about Korean society and how things work here, even though I'm Korean. So, we changed our topic. It's no longer climate forest Arisu. As we already mentioned, we had to narrow it down to be more specific because we got some very constructive feedbacks. So, before we start, this provocation contains some radical ideas, and this idea was awarded Do Not Overstating Climate Change certification. Also, Too Biased Towards Ecology certification. From the very first day and the very last day, we got these comments from different stakeholders, and I appreciate to them as well. So, I'll talk about 소나무. In Korea we call it Korean red pine, but in Japan it's Japanese red pine. It's emotional thing. I don't take side, so whatever you choose, I don't care. Scientists, you can call it Pinus denspora, but let's just talk it 소나무 because now we're in Korea. So, 소나무 is such an important tree. It has been used for many artistic works. We've made palaces, normal houses, worships, namely the turtle worship that you might have heard, and also this prestigious drawing that is behind the throne of King of Korea, Joseon Dynasty actually. So it's important, that's what I want to tell you. It's a very important tree, and we can even map the historical distribution of 소나무 using historical documents because we care about 소나무 and we documented when they got the local products and byproducts from 소나무. And this map just shows, I guess, a PhD student who suffered to draw this nice map from like 1400 all the way to 1930. And as I told you already, it's distributed in Korea and Japan, and especially if you see here, it's basically all over. It's found in Korea, all over the places, wherever you go. So, what? So what's the problem? It sounds good. I'll talk about some forces that is changing the forest, the 소나무 forest. First of all, we have the nature of both. The term nature, I'll just use it. It's a very ambiguous term, but anyway. We have a term succession, which basically is like a self-building mechanism of forest or any kind of ecosystem. So you see Pinus denspora, 소나무 here, and 소나무 is not even the first colonizer of this ecosystem, but after forests, grasses, lichens softened the earth, 소나무 came. I mean, it's still not that productive, but 소나무 finally made this shadow, and below this shadow, other deciduous trees can grow. And in Korea, because we care 소나무 so much, we actually try to stop this force and turn this stage back to 소나무 forest. Or it's not the whole story actually. Because we experience such a mass scale of destruction of forest ecosystem from the early 20th century, it's still, in some parts of Korea, it's the natural status of forest ecosystem. So, on the one hand, we're trying to bring this forest back to 소나무 forest, and on the other hand, we just didn't have enough time to develop the mature forest. And with all this understanding, we in Korea we have 21% of 소나무 forest from the whole forest, and that's as a species the most dominant species in the forests of Korea. And there's another forest, and due to its distribution, its widespread distribution of Korean Peninsula, it always experienced some kinds of pests. So historically we have 송충이, which is pine caterpillar, and we also have some exotic pest species, and it just keep damaging the 소나무 forest to give more pressure to become to a different forest, and it actually give us challenges to keep 소나무 forest as it is. And this is the visual representation of how this pest affects the 소나무 trees, and this is from aerial view in Jeju Island. It's worse in southern parts of Korea. And this scenario proposed that by 1950 or 2050 or 2090, the distribution of 소나무 forest will be rapidly decreased or massively decreased due to climate change. And one thing I would like to share to you is that even some experts or who have been working in environmental NGOs didn't really believe this scenario, which I have no opposition, but at the same time, they didn't really have their scientific arguments to disprove this scenario. So for me, it was really hard to find a common ground, because if there's no way to have a mutual understanding on some kind of scientific publication, how can we even make decision? So that is something that I would like to share, and basically for them it was too radical, like they didn't buy this scenario. So with all these problems, with all our cultural preferences and our efforts to bring this 소나무 forest or keep this 소나무 forest against the force of natural succession and climate change, we are still planting a lot of pine trees in Korea. And so from this point, we have our provocation. And I'd like to really be quick on this because I'd like to listen to your feedback more than my explanation. So at first, we proposed to do something in this Han River watershed, which is such a big area, and we couldn't really narrow it down. And some stakeholders told us it's just too naive and vague if we just keep talking about the rainwater drops on the leaves and comes all the way to soil and we drink it. Even though it sounds poetic, but it doesn't really makes us go further. So we wanted to focus on soil, and just naturally we thought about Namsan, because Namsan and 소나무 has a unbreakable relationship, because in our national anthem on the second verse we have 남산 위에 저 소나무, which is like we believe that 소나무 on Namsan will last forever because they firmly hold their roots in this mountain, which is, I guess, and I expect, not the case. So, in Namsan, on the southern face, we would like to do something from our experience in Germany. Well, because it's again heavily, densely managed to keep the sonamu forest. As you can see, over 60% is sonamu. And we want to do something that makes our forest more diverse, more healthy, and more active by citizens. And we call it climate forest in Namsan, so climate forest Namsan. And what does it mean by diverse, healthy, and active? So when we plant trees, we have to consider more species, not only channamu, sonamu, all these pine trees for cultural or economic benefits, not anymore. And we want it to be healthy, so we want to thin our forest, so we reduce competition, and that will give us opportunity to plant some trees because now we have those gaps. And last but not least, citizens' participation is so important because even if we talk about tree planting and the importance of tree planting, there's no way to do this if there's no interest. And we really have to establish or rediscover our deep connection to not a forest, to actually a single tree. And to do so, I think it's not something groundbreaking, but simple. We need education and maybe some art. Maybe artists can really connect us back to nature. And I'm running out of time, so I don't know if I want to talk about it, but very briefly, I found this value conflicts between foresters and ecologists while conducting our research. There's this strong force of foresters, namely by National Forest Service, that they really want to continue to conserve the pine forest, the sonamu forest, because it's culturally significant, and they believe, and I also believe that people like pine trees. So by selecting these trees, they are holding their values. But on the other hand, they're ecologists who are more inclined to the nature process of this forest. So they want forests to be more nature-like, or even without our intervention, like they want it to be outside of our power, so it can experience the natural succession. But the missing part is that they're really not considering climate change that much, and there's not even a stakeholder like who is really fighting for climate change. And it's not only a big jump for foresters to not even go to the values of ecologists, the nature process of forests. It's also a big jump for these ecologists to really think about the consequence of climate change, because for them it's sometimes not as scientifically solid, because some scenarios maybe use different indicators or different methodologies, and it creates some uncertainties, of course. And I believe that that's actually what we active researchers have to do to really fill this gap and try to communicate all these different stakeholders to understand each other's values and make the holistic decision-making process to not only manage our forest, but to come up with any idea in the era of climate crisis. So, this is the most important part, but I'm out of my time, we have 4 different sites that we would like to apply and actually incorporate all the different stakeholders, so no one is left behind. And we'd like to see how these different sites will be developed. So later we can be more scientifically confident with our suggestions and our stakeholders be happy. Thank you.